Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? We're a bit damp, yes? Yes, I think I should have stolen one of those umbrellas standing out saying hello to people this morning. But well done for getting here in the rain. And big welcome to those of you who are online. Hopefully you're nice and warm at home and not too damp unlike here in Bury St Edmunds. But welcome to Bridge Community Church. My name's David Oakley, senior pastor here. And this is our West Road side. So we've got another site at Wesley, people online. And we're just delighted we can all come together as a church. And I did comment to one or two people this morning as they came in the rain that, like tonight at 6 o'clock, we've got a baptism. Two baptisms, actually, so we're so excited about that. One of our young people, Paris, is getting baptized, and somebody who's joined us probably about 2-3 years ago, King, is getting baptized as well. So if you are able to come back out this evening at 6 o'clock for the celebration, that would be fantastic. But I just wondered whether Derek, who's been filling the baptistry on the quiet, wasted his time. There's so many good puddles outside, isn't there? We could have used those. But anyway, we'll try and keep things warm and snug tonight. So if you are able, 6 o'clock, please come and join us. Carrying on our series, Learning from Jesus. We believe as a church that Jesus is the most incredible person that's ever lived. His impact on history and people is just incredible. And so we want to learn from him. We want to understand more about him. We want to live better lives. We want to know more about God. And so we spend time, big blocks of time, really focusing on the life, the times, and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. And in particular today, we want to learn a little bit about healing. Healing. What needs healing in our life? What needs the touch of God upon our life? I want to take you back to January 1998, when this old man in front of you was 34 years old. And I went to speak at a church on the outskirts of Liverpool. A church I'd spoken at once or twice, but didn't know it so well. And it was a Sunday evening service, and I spoke there. And it was a lovely time, maybe 60, 70 people in the room. And a little group of people came up to me at the end of me talking. And they said, "David, we'd love to pray for you." And I thought, wow, what a lovely thing to do. And so I said, yeah, of course. And then so we went to the back of the room, and probably 4 or 5 people laid hands on my shoulders and started praying for me. And it was an encouraging time. And then after a minute or two, 2 of them dropped to their knees and grabbed hold of my right ankle and started praying for me, and praying in particular for my ankle. At this point, I have to say, I was completely freaked out. I don't do this kind of thing. I wasn't used to this kind of thing. And suddenly people getting hold of my ankle and praying for me. And the reason why it freaked me out was these people didn't know that a few months earlier I'd ripped my ankle ligaments. I was a missionary, cunningly disguised as a semi-pro footballer in the Czech Republic at that point in time. And during a training drill where you jog backwards and then turn and go, as I turned to go, there was a loud popping sound. That popping sound was my ankle ligaments. And I'd struggled to walk, certainly couldn't play. And yet this was a key part of my life, my ministry at that point in time. And these people, without knowing that, grabbed hold of my ankle and started praying for me. The following week, I returned to the Czech Republic, and I thought, well, we better test what these guys are going to do, because a Dutch specialist had already seen me on my ankle. She was very gracious. He said, yep, at best, you're only ever going to get 80% back. You're probably not going to be able to play at the standard you're at. And let's face it, you're 34, so you're past it anyway. You can't beat the Dutch for their direct approach, can you? The wonderful people just tell you the way it is. And so I started going down the gym, started training again, and started playing with my team. The summer, June 98, the World Cup in France. I was part of a Christian outreach football team that went over to the south of France around Marseille, and we took part in tournaments and camps and schools work during that time to share about Jesus. And in particular, at one tournament, we had teams from North Africa, teams from the south of France, a Jewish team that was there, and we played them. And we got to the final, and we won the final. And guess who scored the winning goal on his dodgy ankle? Yes, it was me. I could talk you through it, but we probably haven't got time. But beautiful finish in the bottom corner. It was great with this dodgy right ankle. Just nailed it right in the bottom corner of the net. And after that game, I took the opportunity to stand up and start to share my testimony, telling hundreds of people who were in the crowd about Jesus. And we had a pile of New Testaments there in different languages, French and Arabic and different cultures who were all represented there. Seriously, these New Testaments went within 2 minutes, and the conversations afterwards were absolutely incredible. But it all started when a couple of people dropped to their knees and grabbed hold of my ankle at this church on the outskirts of Liverpool. That, to me, has been the most obvious sign of healing I've ever experienced, especially miraculous. I'd been written off by human authorities and human specialists, but for some reason, something took place that day that led to this liberation in terms of life and ministry. So we're asking the question today, what do we need? Healing in our lives. Can God's power be diverted into your life? Can his healing power be diverted to bring the ministry of healing that you need in your situation? Please note the word diverted there. Emma just read to us a story, and there's that sense of diversion of power. Jesus wasn't in that crowd to minister to a particular person, but still, despite the interruption and the inconvenience, God's power was diverted to bring some healing. When I turned up to that church in Liverpool, it wasn't to be healed. It was to share something of the good news of Jesus. And yet, God's power was diverted in order to bring healing. So as we're thinking about that, I'm thinking, well, how can we create an environment for the possibility that God in his sovereignty will move and work and bring healing in our lives? And from the story we're going to look at, the 3 things I've identified. First of all, we need some courage. We need some bravery. We need to step out of the crowd and act in some way in order to receive the healing that Jesus may well have in store for us. Secondly, there's got to be a sense of conviction, a sense of belief, a sense of confidence in order to take that step. And thirdly, there needs to be a verbal profession also, just to emphasize and bring assurance around that kind of healing. So to unpack this, we're going to again turn to the Gospel of Mark, which has been our focus over the last year or so, at different points, different times. And remember, this is one of 4 accounts about the life, the times, the ministries of Jesus of Nazareth. This one particularly is written for a Western European audience. It's direct, and it challenges the people who live in the center of human empire in the first century, live in the city of Rome. Do you need Jesus in your life? You seem to have everything. You're at the center of power. You've got Caesar. You've got the most powerful army in the world at that time. They have their entertainment, their health, their education. They've got everything. And yet Mark writes to them and says, I think you're missing something. Something that's beyond human power, beyond human empire. And that person is Jesus, and he's worth following. And that's why he writes to this audience there in Rome and kind of resonates with us today as people who benefit from being in Western society. Do we need Jesus in our life? Can he offer something more? And we're going to jump in Mark chapter 5. After the hearing about the unstoppable power of the kingdom of God, Jesus has been teaching through his parables. We read about that in chapter 4, about how his power and his reign starts really small in the lives of people, but it grows to become this unstoppable force. And people heard this, and some people, 2 people in particular, said, okay, Jesus, hearing what you're saying, I'm going to step out the crowd and appropriate that message. So we read about one last week called Jairus, a church leader, synagogue leader, and today this lady who is suffering with this blood hemorrhaging condition. They wanted to step out the crowd to experience the healing. And this person is desperate for the touch of Jesus. So let's jump into our chosen verses for today then. Mark 5, 24 to 25, as we start to think about the role of courage that is needed in order to experience God diverting his healing power. Verse 24 says, a great crowd followed Jesus and thronged about him. There was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. Different reasons why people turn to God, isn't there? For this lady, desperation seemed to be the thing that drove her. The pain that she was suffering, the indignity, the struggle she had had for 12 years drove her to do some outrageous things, to do some acts of courage. So the first act of courage I see is she, even though she's ill and sick, she gets stuck into the crowd. Do you notice that? There's a crowd thronging around Jesus, and this lady gets up and gets amongst it. I don't know about you, but when I'm sick, when I feel ill, the last thing I want to do is jump into a crowd. Because you're ill. You're struggling. You feel weak. And the jostle and push and throng of people, it's just like, man, what's this? This lady showed such determination, such courage to take this step. We read a little bit more. She had suffered much under physicians and had spent all that she'd had and was no better, but rather grew worse. So this condition was debilitating. We don't have any great detail about what the condition was, but clearly this woman is getting worse and worse and worse. She's gone to see all human resources, all people, doctors, medics, physicians. None had the answer. There's even a hint that they may have ripped her off or treated her badly here. But either way, she is desperate. She is worse off. And one thing we don't read of, but we do know about first century Jewish culture, is this lady should not have been in this crowd. Because if you had a condition of blood and bleeding and hemorrhaging, you were excommunicated from your spiritual community, the synagogue. You were not allowed, because of the customs and the laws of the day, because sometimes it was seen as it could be infectious, to mix and mingle with people. So this lady, she's breaking all the rules. Can you imagine the courage she showed there to get in this crowd where the prevailing culture, the rules and regulations for the day said, no, you're an outcast. You're a leper. You should not be amongst us people. Yet, she still gets there in the crowd. Something about what I would call naughty courage gets to you, doesn't it? Sometimes when people just break the rules, get a little bit naughty, there's something about it because it shows something of their heart. It shows something's there that they just want to connect. They just want their issue sorted out. I remember one of my university friends, Joe, needless to say, is a Scouser, as the rest of the story will unfold. Joe, university, good mate of mine, he joined the Navy after university. And one of the naval exercises was almost, posh, high-level, armed forces level of capture the flag. Have you ever played that, or your teenagers have played that? The idea is you have two teams, and somebody's got to grab the flag of the other team and get it back. Well, this was meant to be the naval exercise. So my mate Joe thought, yeah, that sounds good, that sounds great. And he thought, there's an easier way of doing this. So what he did was wake up in the middle of the night, and he decided to nick the other team's flag even before the exercise took place. So that's what he did. Needless to say, the commanding officers were a little bit upset because he'd set up all this preparation, and there's Joe waving the flag, hey, we win. And he got summoned by some high-ranking official within the Navy. And this guy is stripping him down. He's going at him. But the words he said at the end of telling him off was, Turner, you will go far, young man. You will go far. So yeah, there's something that just grips us about naughty courage, isn't it? Sometimes when people break the rules, it shows something of their heart and their determination. And my mate Joe did push on pretty high in the Navy, even though he was naughty, broke rules, and went for it. And in a way, the hunger and desperation of this lady really struck a note with Jesus, as we shall see in the following verses. Let's continue. She heard the report about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. This journey of desperation continues. So yeah, the lady's shown courage in A, being in the crowd when she's physically sick, but B, because of the stigma that she already carried of not being allowed to mix and mingle. Now she does another outrageous thing. She reaches out and grabs the clothes of the rabbi. The unclean grabs the clean. Outrageous. Totally, again, against customs, and obviously coming up from behind. She didn't really want to be known or seen to do it, but she did grab at the garments of Jesus. Another step of courage. This lady had reached desperation stages. She'd heard reports about Jesus and thought, this is it, last chance saloon. I'm going to grab Jesus and see if that will make a difference. It's a point of no return. Either Jesus intervenes or it's all over for this lady. Sometimes we reach that point in our lives, don't we? Perhaps we've tried every human effort to sort whatever needs healing in our life. Perhaps we've tried everything we can think of, and we just drop to our knees and say, Jesus, unless you do something, it's over. Perhaps we're at that point. Dare I say, as a church, we're at that point financially. For 10 years, we've been bleeding money. Okay, we've got away with it a few years because of legacies and one or two other things, but fundamentally, our underlying thing is that we've been bleeding money. And that's why Thursday night was so precious, just to share with you and see your response and hear your response, that we're going to turn to Jesus and see what Jesus can do in this situation. We're desperate. Humanly speaking, we can't see how we can make next year's budget work. But if we bring Jesus into the occasion, then just maybe we can see that kind of turnaround. Show some courage, reaching out and touching Jesus. Question though, why did she grab the garment of Jesus? Why didn't she just grab him? Why did she go for her clothes? So I've got sort of a few why questions here about her motives and desires here. In Mark 3, verse 10, we read previously that people pressed in to touch Jesus, but she seems to be doing something different here. She seems to be going for his outer clothing rather than Jesus himself. And so we read, this is her thinking, this is her conviction, this is her belief. She said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So we see this, not a grab for Jesus, but for a grab for his clothing. Now, most likely, that outer garment was what is known as a talit. It's a Jewish prayer shawl. And it's probably that she made a grab for. And as a result of taking that step of courage based on this conviction, if she just grabbed the prayer shawl of Jesus, then she would be healed. There is a soundness restored to her body. There is a wholeness that she feels. Where on earth did this lady get this thinking, this conviction, this brief from, if you like? Well, we read back in Numbers 15, the Old Testament scriptures, God commanding the people of Israel, speak to the people of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corner of their garments throughout their generations. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all of the commandments of the Lord to do them. So this talit, these prayer shawls, were very much part of Old Testament and Jewish culture. Now, I'm sorry, I do not have a Jewish talit. And I hope this isn't disrespectful. The nearest thing I could find was my eldest son's poncho. And the reason why I picked it is because there are some tassels, you see. I'm not sure if it's going to go over my head and microphone, but we'll have a go. There we go. That's a good look, isn't it? Woo! So you see these things here, the tassels. These are part of the talit, the prayer garment, a Jewish rabbi and Jews of the day who were serious about their faith. It's a picture of protection. It's a picture of belonging. It's a picture of a tactile reminder. So when Jews prayed, they get hold of these tassels and pray. It's part of their reminder. We belong to God. God intervenes. God protects. God acts on our behalf. It's a sign of access and protection. So this lady understood this. But there's an additional part as well. Malachi 4, verse 2, for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. And you might say, well, what on earth has that got to do with tassels? Well, the word for wings and the word for tassel in the original Hebrew comes from the same root word. It's virtually the same word. So it's this picture, there'll be healing in the tassels of a talit garment. This is what convinced the lady to get in the crowd and grab at Jesus' garment. She, despite being excluded from the community of the people of God for 12 years, understood her Old Testament scriptures well enough to take a chance on Jesus. She was believing, she acted in faith and confidence and courage and made a grab for these tassels because in her mind, the Messiah had healing not only in his touch, but in his wings, his tassels. Many signs were expected of a messianic godlike figure. You know, they expected the big feeding miracles, the banquet miracles, those touch healing miracles. I'm going to take this off. I'm getting sweaty now. Here we go. Ruined my hair. No good. There we go. But yeah, these tassels were incredibly significant. This lady, excluded, yet something in her core belief made that grab. Because she believed that if Messiah had healing in his wings, Jesus picked this up as well. Jesus, perceiving in himself the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" Jesus was aware that despite the press of a crowd, someone had reached out and grabbed him in a different way. They weren't touching him. They went for the healing power available from the messianic wings, the God intervention wings. And of course, there's an understandable response from the disciples. Jesus' disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, Jesus, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. It's an understandable response from the disciples. Jesus was surrounded, and also they were in a hurry. Remember, they had an agenda to go and see the synagogue leader's family, their daughter, who was dying. They couldn't hang around. They couldn't be diverted. They couldn't get distracted. They needed urgently to get to this guy's house. And yet, Jesus insisted, "Who touched me?" Kept looking around, wouldn't let them get away with it. Why would Jesus insist on this? I think he wanted a fuller story for people to grasp and understand in the crowd. I think also he wanted to speak to the woman personally to assure her that her act of convicting faith was something that was going to stick and last and count. Huge crowd of people, yet only one or two desperate enough to take a chance on Jesus. A religious crowd, a people who understood the text and the culture of the day and what God was doing. Yet there was this one person, the excluded one, who reaches out. Through the scriptures, something had been revealed to this lady that caused her to have a conviction for courage to reach out. What has Jesus been saying to you of late? What has Jesus been revealing to you of late? What is your courageous action point as a result of what Jesus has been saying? Would you be like this lady and take that step of faith and reach out in some way? Courage, conviction, and lastly, confession. The woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. The lady's courage continues. The gazing eyes of Jesus was too much. She came forward in trembling and fear. And then she started to speak and share her story, the backstory of what had gone on in her life and what Jesus had done. Public testimony is scary, isn't it? Please pray tonight for Paris and for King. They've got to stand up here and share their story, their testimony before being baptized. It's a scary thing. Sometimes we come up here with trembling. And yet this lady, again, showing courage, but the necessity to confess verbally what took place was really important. And look at the response of Jesus. Yeah, she had broken a few rules, but there's no sense of condemnation. There's no sense of, right, get out the crowd. You don't belong here. What are you doing grabbing at me? None of that, is there? Instead, Jesus says this, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." What a beautiful response. Daughter. That term is used very, very rarely by Jesus. I think there's only one or two other times in the Gospels where that term is used. This excluded lady, excluded for 12 years from the people of God, is suddenly now, hey, you're totally included. You're part of the family. You're my daughter. That sense of acceptance, wonderful release. Secondly, Jesus says, your faith has made you well. There was no magic in the garments of Jesus. There was no magic, really, in the tallit and the tassels that came off that. It was her faith, her act of courage and confidence and belief in Jesus that caused the healing. And two outcomes of that healing. First of all, go in peace, go in shalom, well-being, thriving. Your future is going to be different from your past. This is what Jesus says with that sense of mental well-being, social well-being at every level. There was going to be a new life ahead for this lady. Why? Because she'd been healed of her disease. It wasn't some temporary fix. There'd been real healing that took place. She'd taken a risk. She'd moved out of the safety of the crowd, reached out in conviction and grabbed Jesus. And what an outcome. The acceptance, the belonging, the peace, the mental well-being, the physical well-being, the social well-being, it's all there as a result of what this lady did. Beautiful, beautiful response and picture. I guess my question this morning is, are we desperate enough to see this kind of healing in our lives? What's our response as we think about what this lady did and the implications for us? One thing that I've turned to occasionally over the years when I've become desperate is something known as the prayer of Jabez. You may have come across it if you've read your Bibles a few times. 1 Chronicles 4, 9-10. To me, it's just a beautiful way when I'm desperate and just need God to move and will to articulate and express my desperation. And this might be appropriate for you with what you're facing. This is what the context is in verse 9 of 1 Chronicles 4. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother called his name Jabez because I bore him in pain. Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, the context is this lady had such a horrific birth experience, she called her child Pain. Can you imagine the fun of growing up with the name of Pain? Is Pain coming out to play? Is Pain here? Can Pain come round for tea today? Every time his name was mentioned, it was a reminder of what his mother thought of him. Can you imagine the emotional, mental, physical, every level impact on this lad? Horrific. Every time someone mentioned his name, Pain, you cause hurt to other people. Growing up with that, living with that. Well, eventually he had enough and he cried out to the God of Israel and prayed this prayer. Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, that your hand might be with me, that you would keep me from harm so that it might not bring me pain. And God granted what he asked. God brought a transformation in Jabez's life. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but something took place that the man who was a pain suddenly became a blessing. The man who was a curse suddenly knew life and joy. This man, where it would have been a restricted life, had a larger life. His borders had been enlarged. That God would keep him from that thing of his name, that pain, that hurt. There was that breakthrough. There was an answer when he was struggling. I sometimes use this prayer. And as a result of sharing some of the things we're facing in the next 12 months, I'm committing to pray this prayer every day to see God break through in our church. And I'll love you to join me as a congregation as we pray into that. But also, maybe there's something personal that needs that breakthrough moment. So before we turn to communion, I just thought it'd be good if we could quietly close our eyes, bow our heads, and have a time of prayer. Maybe you might find this helpful depending on where you're at to symbolically just reach out your hand. Symbolically, you're just thinking, I'm like that lady. I'm desperate, Jesus. I'm desperate. I'm reaching out to you this morning. Maybe that's your act of courage this morning as we bow our heads. King Jesus, we're reaching out to you this morning. You know the hurt and pain in my brothers and sisters' lives, the people who sit before me, the people who are even online. You know that. You have that insight. You know their struggle. Jesus, would you intervene? Would you release your healing power and your peace upon people today? Whatever that struggle is, it might be a relational problem, it might be a physical problem, it might be an opportunity that's disappeared, it might be an emotional, mental problem. Whatever it is, Jesus, you're bigger than any of our problems. We're crying out as people hold up their hands and reach out to you in desperation that you would start to bring your healing. Jesus, I thank you that in the last 12 months, particularly over our Wesley site, we have seen 3 miraculous healings. And maybe today you want to do business with somebody here at the West Road site. We're crying out, Holy Spirit, move, work, bring your healing. We're reaching out for you today in conviction and courage that you are the God who diverts your power to bring your healing and restoration. Jesus, we ask this for your sake and for your glory. Amen.